Blessings to all, and welcome to another episode of Elevate the Mic. And I'm your host, Max Mupese. Today we have a guest who is not only a visionary, somebody I like to call a creative spirit, an entrepreneur, and somebody who brings people together, specifically in the city of Montreal. Let us all welcome Vincent. How you doing, man?
How you doing?
Great.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
Me too. We've met many times.
But
it
always feels like it's the first time, right?
Well, I've never been a visionary before, and now I am like I feel the power filling me. This visionary power. See the future.
And I don't want to use that word lightly. The reason why I'm saying visionary is because you're able to create a vision. We're gonna get into the projects you worked on, but you were able to create a vision that is brought to life, and people are actually contributing to that actual vision, and that's how I really see it. And I'm pretty sure if I ask a lot of people who know you, they will also claim you as a visionary.
Wow.
Because I'm telling you, it's something, man. It's not some minute. It's actually something that's real, and it's brought to
I appreciate the compliment.
Right.
I feel like Steve Jobs is a visionary, maybe Jay-Z is a visionary,
Right.
Certain people. I am not a visionary.
Right.
I appreciate the compliment, though.
Got it.
I work really hard, and I think I have had a vision sometimes, and I've had people who believe in that vision and help make it come to life. But I can't. So I don't know. That's a big word.
Yeah, big word.
It's like when you're a genius. I'm like, whoa, no. I know geniuses. I'm not one of them.
Let's not get there yet.
So yeah, not there yet. Not there yet. But
Perfect.
I work hard, and people seem to believe in the things I want to work on and want to work with me, and that's great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. So for anybody who's watching this for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about your story? Like, how did you grow up which part of Montreal did you grow up in, and what was your experience like when you first fell in love with hip hop?
Sure. So I'm Vincent Stephan Ong. I grew up in MDG, the coronation between Fielding and Chester. And
Stomping grounds.
And grew up in NDG, lived in Montreal my whole life. Went to. I'm going to be 48 this year. So
Okay.
I was born in 1976, and so in early high school was like the 90s, and it was the beginning of hip hop. It was the beginning of. I listened to a lot of very mainstream hip hop at the time, but that was what was popular. That was. I'm trying to think of. Oh my God, I'm blanking on names right now.
Good.
But like Young MC and like all the really popular 90s stuff. And that was kind of my gateway into some, I don't know, Tribe Called Quest and other stuff that was coming out at the time. But it was just like kind of the pop music of its day. But I would say it was, other than Michael Jackson, it was the first pop music that grabbed me. Up until then, music was just, it was there. I knew what it was, and I was taking little piano lessons as a kid and whatever, but nothing really grabbed me. But then Michael Jackson and hip hop was like, wow, this is a whole other, I grew up, I don't know, I'm trying to name the era, but all the Janet Jackson, Belle Biv DeVoe, like all that stuff was what I was listening to growing up, and then never really thought about it. But then, actually, that's not entirely true. So one of my favorite groups in high school was Digital Underground. And I think a big part of it was, well, not a big part, but a part of it was, like I said, I was taking piano lessons.
Right.
And there were piano solos. And I would never have thought, while I was taking my like little classical piano lessons, that I could play on a hip hop track. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what, But that kind of like opened up my idea of what is possible, and of course with all the classic 90s Tribe, whatever, using jazz samples and all that kind of thing, heard real instruments being used as samples, and I started studying jazz and saxophone in high school, and then and then eventually decided, I'm kind of compressing it real quick.
Right.
You know what, I'll give the little backgrounder. So being a good Chinese boy, I went into pure and applied sciences, and long story short, I graduated in computer science, and I was working as a software developer programmer in the beginning of the .com kind of era, and I worked a lot, and I made my money during that time, and then I sort of decided, am I going to, like, I've always loved music, I've always been doing music, but just as a fun side thing, which is completely fine.
Right.
But do I want to actually give this a shot, like for real, like to actually do this, like, you know. And I made money by working computers and all this, and I said, you know what, let's try. I'm going to quit my job and go back to school and see what happens. And so that's what I did. I quit my job. I went back to school. I studied, but I only went back for a year. But then I started, you know, gigging around town, teaching, and just trying to figure out, like, okay, now I have no income coming in. How do I make a living? You know,
that's a real challenge.
Big challenge. For me, that was by teaching. And you know, we're here at Trebas, so you know, we're all about teaching, education. So I started teaching a lot, and then at a certain point, I was like, well, I didn't get into music specifically to teach. I got into music to perform, so I started reducing my teaching load, started to perform more, eventually performed with Community. I went to a workshop and then became part of the group, then started performing with Pneumatic Massive and other artists, started touring with different people, and then started my own projects. So this is the very long explanation that I am a saxophone player and a keyboard player, and I've founded 2 projects. One is Le Cypher X, which is a freestyle hip-hop group, and the other one is the Urban Science Brass Band, which is like a combination of New Orleans style brass bands, but instead of doing traditional jazz, we do hip-hop. So instead of like steppers and second line dancers, we have street dancers, and we've got MCs on megaphones and horns playing like sometimes classic hip-hop tracks or our own original material and so on. So that's in a nutshell.
Right. Hey, thank you for beautifully explaining all of this, sharing all of this information. I remember the first time I went to, it was Le Cypher, if I'm not mistaken, on Blurry Street downtown. You guys had this venue packed, and I'm like, there's no way people could breathe in there. I don't know if there was a fan or anything, but it was hot and everybody was having a great time. So could you tell us about how did that idea come about, and what was the inspiration behind that?
So Le Cypher is like the precursor to Le Cypher X. And Le Cypher was every week, Thursday nights, we would have a live band hip-hop jam session. And to kind of summarize it real quick, basically, I had discovered a group called The Lesson, based out of New York. And what it was I mentioned that I used to play in Community and Pneumatic Massive and all this. There's this guitar player, Jordan Peters, who was among all those circles. I think he grew up in Saint-Eustache or something. He's also in Montreal, raised, or the Environ de Montreal. And he had moved to New York, and he started playing with The Lesson and the groups. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be in town. I'm going to go check this out. So I went and checked it out. And honestly, the first time was not my best experience. I was just like, I don't know if I really like this, but I didn't even understand what it was. And then afterwards, he told me, wait a second, did you bring your horn? Because this is a jam session. And I was like, oh, I didn't understand that's what it was, you know? So then I went a couple of times, and I was like, okay, I see, this is an open jam session, hip hop with a live band. Anybody can go up and rap or sing or whatever, or play an instrument, whatever. And I was like, oh man, Montreal needs their version of this, you know? So I came back like energized, and I went like, I said, Jordan, I got to talk to you. I got to call you. I got to figure out how this works. Talk to him about it. Just figured out how they make it work. I was like, okay, how can we make this work in Montreal? And then eventually started up in Montreal, and it had quite a following. You know, the Blurry was really where we developed our following and also our sound. I would encourage all like artists who are starting a project, start with a small venue that believes in you. If you pack that venue and it's got a lineup out the door, you know, it's better than a gigantic 300-person venue and you got 50 people. It feels like dead. Absolutely. You go to a tiny venue, 50 people in the room, another 100 out the door.
Pack that place.
That's it, you know. So so that was a great place where we really developed our thing. And it's also, I love the idea in music venues of very little separation between the audience and the band itself. You know, like where we're sitting right now would be how close you could be to the drummer or the MC or whatever. And it's like, man, you're gonna feel it there. You know? Intimacy, exactly. You know, so that was kind of where we developed our thing, and then. A few years later, they unfortunately had to close, and so we ended up moving to Bootlegger Bar. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, which really threw things for a loop. But we're back, and that's why we've kind of rebranded as Cypher X. So we no longer host a weekly jam session. It started in 2014, so this year, 2024, is going to be our 10-year anniversary.
Congrats.
And thank you. And it was just like, it was a lot to work every single week bringing this thing up. I mean, it was a joy, and it was, you know, so many connections were made and all this kind of thing. But it was a lot of work to put together. So we no longer host the open jam session, but we do performances about once a month, and those are basically an invite-only group. It was basically like the house band was, and we try to create a very high level of improvised freestyle hip-hop, essentially. And the other reason why we were feeling okay about stopping it is a couple of the people who are part of Le Cypher, Shem G, Darkest Millen, as well as some other folks that are kind of part of the family. Shane is part of the family as well. They started another event which is called Grove.
Okay.
And Grove happens at Turbo House on Wednesdays, and it's carrying the torch. It's an open jam session, live band, hip hop, you know, kind of thing. And so I'm like, well, we don't have to keep going. There's another generation that's taking it to the next level. So, you know, feel comfortable about stopping the open jam aspect of it.
That's powerful, because out of creating your project or your project, it helps somebody else, also part of your team, create their own project. So in a nutshell, it's almost like you basically put that person on and developed that person subconsciously, like through your actions. They were able to say, okay, you know what, I'm able to create something as well.
Yeah, it's active action and just providing opportunities. Like, definitely Cypher itself as a jam session was just giving up, like, how many MCs, you know, have performed with a live band? Like, very few, right? I mean, usually that's not how that develops, you know. It's, you're in your studio, you're making beats, you're rapping over them, you know. Especially these days, it's all doing your work in your basement on your laptop or whatever, you know what I mean?
Auto-tune.
Well, I don't have any problem with that. I just
Me neither.
Yeah,
you know,
but it
like
just
using auto-tune.
exactly, you know, and it just that it becomes a very solitary activity, you know, and like even when you're working with a beat maker, there's send me 5 beats. Okay, I like the third one. You know, it's not even an interactive like, oh, could you do this to it? Could you? No, it's just like I like the third one. You know what I mean? So it's, but when you're in a live band situation, it's completely different. Beat starts like, oh, that's not the BPM I wanted. Well, it's your turn to rap. Do you want to rap on it or not? Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it develops all kinds of skills and how to hold a mic. It's one thing to hold a mic in a studio. Well, usually you're not even holding the mic in the studio, right? So it's one thing to hold the mic in a studio type situation. It's another thing to hold it in a live situation where you got the drummer a foot behind you, you know? So, you know, it's you learn all of these skills. And like I mentioned earlier that Shane, Shem, and Darkest have started their own thing. Grove, yeah. And Darkest specifically, I remember like the very first time he came, we were doing freestyle competitions. And so I don't remember everyone that was there, but I do remember that Monk E was one of the other competitors, who was an international freestyle champion. You know what I mean? Yeah, you know, and Darkest came in second. And it was not that far between the two of them. So there's this guy who nobody knows, who was like, I'm assuming he was 18. He was in a bar, so I'm assuming he was 18 at the time.
No beer, nothing. Baby face.
A young man making his place, you know. But he didn't know how to hold a mic. He didn't, like, it was real, like all the technique was bad. But his raw freestyle skill was insane. Enough so that he could hold his own against Monk E, and it was close. Like, I mean, you know, Monkey won, no question, but like, he was really holding it down. And to be like this kid that nobody knows holding it down against an international freestyle champion.
That's different.
You know, so that he's developed, he's gotten better, he knows how to hold mic. You know, he has his own thing. He plays with Cypher X now and brass band and everything. He's, you know, so, you know, seeing that progression is very gratifying, and knowing that the next generation is in capable hands as well, you know.
That's great.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, you were many different hats. You're also a musician. One thing that was great that I always loved from you when you were able to host those events is that you were actually hosting events, performing, making sure that you have an idea. You're also a promoter, so you were working.
Yeah,
you were working 3 different jobs.
Yeah,
4 different jobs. So how were you able to juggle all of that and telling yourself to not spread yourself too thin?
I'm not sure that I didn't spread myself too thin.
Okay.
You know, I think the reality of starting up a project, I mean, unless you have like crazy source of money or whatever, you know what I mean? Unless you got something like that, the reality is whatever project you're starting, you are doing all of it. You know what I mean? I mean, there may be other people who want to help and whatever, you know. I also have always been of the perspective that if anybody helps in the project, they should be rewarded for that in some way, usually financially, even if it's not much, you know. Like I think at some point, like I said, I used to do everything, you know. And then at some point I was like, okay, we need somebody else doing the posters. We need somebody else just calling up the musicians and being like, who's available, like getting the scheduling and all this kind of thing.
Right.
And I think the scheduling, I was paying somebody like, I don't know, like $20 per week that they would book the musicians, you know, so maybe $100 a month or something like that, which obviously is not a lot of money and not enough to survive on. But for me, it was the principle of just like, I'm going to pay you something to do this, because you're not just showing up and performing, you're actually doing something beyond that to make the event run. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you have to pay everybody and blah, 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 but, you know, because between paying somebody $100 a month and just like, you know, it's almost nothing, you know.
Right. But once you're starting, not to cut you off, once you're starting, is different. Like,
once you're starting is different, but also, for me, it was the principle of just giving somebody something, you know. But the important thing is to figure out what you can delegate, and delegate it as soon as things start to work, you know. If you're in a situation where, you know, for whatever reason, everyone's down to just do it for free or for fun or whatever, awesome, you know. Like, I mean, there's so many, you know, I don't know, like movies or whatever, where it's like $0 budget, you know, but it's, and it looks terrible, but there's something about it that's charming, because you know everyone is just doing this because they want to, you know what I mean? So, you know, and it's like, yeah, we live in this world with like candid council and this and that, and you know, I was never really a grants person until the pandemic, when there were no more gigs, and it's like they were throwing money at the arts, so it's like, well, let's try to, you know, get some of that stuff. But anyway, getting back to your question, I think that in the beginning you have to be as good as you can and learn as many aspects of, it's a business, right?
Yes.
You got to learn as many aspects of running the business as possible. You know, and the more you know those things, for example, you know, let's say, you know, you're running a podcast, you know, and let's say at the beginning, you're like one guy, I set up the cameras, I set up the mics, I da-da-da-da-da. Now, let's say you never learned how to do that. So how do you hire a guy to do the camera if you've never done it?
That's it.
You don't know what makes it good or bad, right? So you got to kind of know some basic stuff. The other thing I'll say is that, like, I've always had tremendous respect when I work at like I'm playing at a venue or something like that.
Right.
So actually the exact same thing happened at two different venues, the same venue owner who did the exact same thing, and I'm like, these guys are real. These are guys that are supporters or whatever. And what happens, this is a little gross, but it's like, you know, you're doing a venue, you know, you wear a blur, you know how many people were in there, all this kind of thing. There's only so many toilets. And guess what? Sometimes toilets back up and overflow. And you got a bartender, you got a busboy, you got a security guy. Who of those guys is going to stop doing their job and go fix the toilet? Because you got to fix that toilet.
That's important.
Of course.
Very important, especially with that many people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
And in so I don't know whether I should name the venues, because on one hand they were the heroes, but on the other hand they had to do the dirty deed. But the owners of two venues, when that happened, they're like, well, I'm the only one who's not essential right now. I'm going to go and get the poop out of the toilet and take care of that business, you know. So it's like, yeah, that's the guy who sweeps the floors at night. Sometimes that's the boss, because there's no one else to do it, and it has to get swept. You know? So, so you got to learn all the things and be willing to do all the things when it needs to be done.
I like what you're saying, because it reminds me of similar to what Nipsey Hussle once said. He said, before he even thinks about hiring an engineer, a sound engineer, he wants to make sure that he masters that aspect of the sound, and then he tells that person what to do. Because you're not necessarily going to hire, like you said, you're not going to hire a person knowing that you're quote unquote ignorant to a point where, like, you don't know what they're doing on a day-to-day. So if ever you have the ability to master that skill, then it's going to be easier for you to delegate or even hire that person.
Yeah, and I hesitate to use the word master, though, because there is the danger of being like the what do you call it, micromanager. Right? Because well, this guy can't do it because I know how to do it, and that, you know, it's like, no, at some point there are 2 different ways or 5 different ways of doing the thing. They might do it slightly differently. Are you happy with the end result? Hire the guy. It's one less thing that you're doing, you know. So there is, I mean, I'm not I know more than Nipsey. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that, like, you know, there is that danger of being like, okay, I'm going to be the engineer. I'm going to do the costumes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do whoa. It's too many things.
It's way too many hats to wear.
Yeah, you know. So yeah.
Great. So could you tell us a little bit more about the team, the aspect of building a team? How did that go about? Because that's very important. A lot of people, we're talking about delegating, we're talking about creating your own projects, but what were the first things you had to do in order to build a team that you have right now?
You know, that's a great question. It makes me reflect on how my answer to that question has changed over the years. So in other words, it kind of, how you develop your team depends on where you are and who you know and all those kinds of things. And I'll sort of answer the question by not giving like a whole nother like history of my life thing, but you know, like when I switched out of computers and started doing music, I was 27, I think, at the time. And I'm not sure if the grant still exists, but there was a grant called Jeune Volontaire. And for anybody watching this, if it does still exist, then do check it out. It was basically out of the régie like the basically job placement kind of régie. And it was something where if you were under 30, you could propose a project to them that would be up to 1 year long, and they would give you a budget based on the number of participants in the project and give everybody a certain amount of income and blah, 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 so you could basically fulfill this project.
Right.
But it was not limited to the arts. So for me, I produced my first album out of that, but I remember at the time there was like this group of like 10 young kids who were like, we're starting a video game company, and we're just gonna get all of these young guys on this grant and kind of do it. That somebody else was putting on a series, like a theater or live performance series, you know. Right. And so some things were arts, but some things were just starting up a business or whatever. It was jeune volontaire, you know, you're starting off your career in whatever, you know. Sorry, the reason why I mentioned that is that I worked on my first album, and I had all these tunes that I'd written and whatever, and I worked on it and put it out there. But then after doing that, I was like, you know what, I think I made a huge mistake.
Okay.
Because all of the musicians that I respected worked as sidemen for years and years and years before they released their album as leader. They played for, instead of like putting out their thing as leader, they're like, I'm going to back up Max Pessing and back up whoever, you know, tons of other artists. They had experience with 20, 30 artists, and then like, now I know what I want to do, and I got to put it out. So I kind of was like, whoops, I think I mean, I don't regret the album or anything like that, but it's just, it made me reflect on that, you know. So then after that, when I started seeking out playing opportunities, I did perform as a leader, but I was really looking to just be hired by other people, you know. So I was like, I got to get really good on the saxophone, get on the keys, so that other people call me. And I started, you know, performing more for other people's projects, you know. So coming back to your original question, because I started playing with other people's projects, I started meeting lots of other musicians, right? When you're just doing your project, it's all about who you're gonna hire for the project. But now when you're working with other people, I'm doing this project, I'm like, oh, this guy, I need a camera guy for next time. Maybe I'm gonna call this guy or this girl or whoever, you know? So your network starts to expand, you know? And then I would say, I mean, I would say that was the big part of it, just performing in many other projects where I met a lot of different musicians. Yes. Then before the Cypher started, I basically started doing private invite-only jam sessions. And so I mean, jam sessions is another way to meet people. You just go out to different things, go out to shows, introduce yourself, you know, all this kind of thing. But jam sessions, you actually are performing with them, and they get a sense of what you're about and what they're about and what you're trying to achieve musically. So I started to do these invite-only jam sessions where we were trying out all kinds of weird ideas, and that eventually helped me to, first of all, work with people that had not necessarily played together. You know, I don't know, let's say I get one of the MCs from Pneumatic Massive, and I was just reflecting, I toured maybe 2 years, I think, with Paul Carniello, who's like a rocker, not indie rocker, well, I guess so. Anyway, singer-songwriter rocker. And let's say, I don't know, the bass player from that band, and the MC from Pneumatic Massive, you know what I mean, and a dancer from, it's like all these different circles, and you put them together, and they've never met each other, but they're all on a certain professional, you know, level, or a similar level, never mind professional level, just a similar level. And it's like, okay, now what can we make together? Like, we're all good at what we do, and we're trying to make something nice, and you know, so you start to bring your different elements together. And then, like I said, I started the Cypher jam session, and then naturally, by hosting a jam session, you have people coming in on a regular basis, and you know, you start to see who could be, oh, this guy looks, let me call them next time, maybe we need a keyboard player for next time. So it was kind of a self fulfilling system where we started to meet more and more players. I would say now where we are, where Cypher doesn't exist as a jam session, it exists as a different project. It's mostly like word of mouth references, right? So everyone has kind of, you know, most of the artists in the group are at a certain level of maturity in their careers, and so they can be like, hey, you know, I did a gig with this guy. I think he'd be a perfect match for this thing. If you need somebody, give the guy a call. So it starts to become more about that than anything else. So
would you say that experience helped you work with different promoters as well? Because I understood you said you worked with Nomadic. That was a group, which is a legendary group in Montreal for people who don't know Nomadic. And would you say that experience alone was able to help you work with other promoters or even other music professionals in the city of Montreal?
I would say Nomadic specifically was my first real like touring outside of Canada experiences, and across Canada as well. And I would say that was probably the biggest things that I learned, because when I joined Nomadic, they had already slowed down doing like local shows, right? The reality is I've almost never really worked with a local promoter, and I'm not sure, the honest reality is I'm not sure how valuable it is for most local artists to work with a local promoter, like a local show promoter, in the sense that like, well, there's two sides of it. There's two sides of it. First thing, I'll tell a little story, again involving Monkey. Actually, this was years ago. Cypher had just gotten started, and you know, we're at Blurry and getting these big number of people coming out, and I was randomly at Canadian Tire shopping, and I run into Monkey, and Monkey is there, and he's like, hey, how you doing, you know, and we connect, and he's like, hey, Cypher's going really well, like I was so impressed when I went there, it was like huge, and da-da-da-da, and he's like, you're really doing an amazing job of promotion, and I said, I don't know if I am, and he says, well, how could, I mean, it's so full. It's like, well, we're in Canadian Tire right now, how many people are in this store? Like 200 people. It was a big Canadian Tire. It was like 200 people or something like that. It's like, well, I don't know. It's like, how many people aside from you and me have ever heard of Cypher?
Right.
Right? But of those 200, if they all came, how many would like it and want to come back? Maybe 50, maybe more, you know what I mean? So it's like your job of promotion that you might think is good.
Right.
It's like, well, I'm not even reaching the 200 people in this Canadian Tire right now. You know?
Right.
So, but anyway, so that's the one side, is like sometimes you have something, you know, sometimes we refer to the music as a product, like your art, your album, your whatever, your event is a product. It's just a terminology. It's not something to be derogatory about the thing, but it's like if you have a good product, whatever the thing is great, then it's just about getting the word out and just showing people and be like, look, this is the thing, come get it, come to the event, buy the album, stream the thing, whatever it is, you know. But then other times there's sort of a cap on how many people would be interested, right? So it's like, do you want to work with a local promoter when at the end of the day, the show is going to have your friends and your family, and that's it, because it's just not going to go beyond that. That's just what the project is, you know. And I'm not trying to insult anybody's project, but it just doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't have the appeal, you know, like, you know, if I mean, how many times are people telling you, hey man, I got a show this Saturday, you gotta come check it out, and maybe you do want to check it out, but how many times are you like, it's cool, I have something,
I have to think about it, you know.
Yeah, just because I don't know, man, there's a lot of things we could do, you know. And do I want to go see that show? Do I want to see a different show? Do I want to stay home and watch movies? Like, I don't know. There's so many options for at the end of the day, yes, it's art, but it is, for the audience, it's primarily entertainment. And so if I'm choosing my entertainment, there's a lot of competition there, you know. So so coming back to your question about promoters, I have not really worked with local well, that's not entirely true. Like we have Indie Montreal is our booking agent for the Urban Science Brass Band and Cypher, and we've worked with them in certain capacities on promotion, but it's mostly just like putting together a press kit and sending it out to, you know, news media and all that kind of thing, which again is like, well, who reads it? Does anybody get it? Like who, you know, so I'm not going to say it can't work, but there's on the one hand, you might have something really good, and it's just about getting it out there and somehow piercing through the billions of press releases that the news media people get. And on the other hand, there's the thing of maybe your project doesn't have what it takes. Maybe it's something, maybe this is just a personal thing. You just got to get this out there, do it, and it's great. Or maybe it's the kind of thing that, I mean, there's so, like if we're talking about music, there's so many different, like maybe, I don't know, you put out a hip hop album and it's like, well, first of all, are you expecting to get airplay on radio in Montreal? Because what options are there for that? Like aside from college radio and CKUT, you know, and stuff like that, which is great, but
like
you know,
public.
You know, it's not going to get played on, unless Duke Eatman comes in. It's you're not going to get played on CBC or whatever, you know. So it's like, well, you don't have that many options. So, you know, you can't make that and then say, well, you know, I need to have a promoter to push it out there. It's like the promoter's like, well, I can't push it to the radio. Like I can't, you know. But then let's say a hip hop album, but you also produced all the beats, you know. Then you could be like, well, what if I took just the instrumental beats and I found somebody to like sell that for licensing in ads and movies and whatever. It's like, oh, maybe that has, you know, because that there's no like stigma about rap music in the case of beats, you know, or not as much anyway, you know. I don't think there's any stigma, but you know, so it's like it's like sometimes promotion is not always the answer. Sometimes there's like a different venue to push your music or your art or whatever it is in a specific direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even to that answer, venue, just the name of the venue sells itself. Like, hey, I'm performing at this venue. You know.
Sometimes, I mean, I think the thing for me, the thing about venues is whether the actual owner believes in you or not is a huge factor. You know, you mentioned Blurry Bar. You know, Seb Fauteux, who ran Blurry Bar, he was a DJ, or is a DJ, you know, and he was very connected to the electronic music scene and just music in general. And when I proposed this idea of the live band hip hop jam session, he was like, this sounds amazing. We want to do this, you know. He actually changed the programming at the time at Blurry Bar in order to have us, you know, come in. You know, right now we're often performing at Au Patrovis, and the owner of Au Patrovis, Gary Tremblay, is also the owner of Diazons, which is a jazz bar, and we've performed there as well. And he's a huge supporter of what we're doing. Like every time we've been at Au Patrovis, he's been there, unless he's like sick or something, he's there. Like the owner is there. Like he also owns Diazons, but he's at the show at Au Patrovis, you know. And I was speaking to the staff the last time, and the bartender was like, you know, like every time you guys do a show here, I request to be working here. You know, so I'm like, cool. You know, we got supporters there that are willing to make it happen, and that makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
so,
it could, you know, it gives a certain, it creates certain life.
Sure.
To the event.
Sure. Because your original question was kind of like, if you doesn't the venue name kind of sell? I mean,
right. Yeah.
I don't think it like if I.
It depends.
Know,
there's so many factors.
Urban Science Brass Band. It's like, okay, we're performing at Place Belle. Is that gonna sell the 5,000, 20,000? I don't think it will.
It really depends.
You know?
It really depends.
So your name still has to draw. You know, you still have to do promotion. You still have to have a certain, you know. I mean, the thing about the Urban Science Brass Band, which I always find insane, is that we've had a certain amount of success. We played Festival d'été de Québec, Jazz Fest many times, like almost every Quebec festival, but we don't even have an album.
Okay.
You know, so it's entirely based on word of mouth, right? So that's been a great blessing. At the same time, we are working on an album right now, but I guess the lesson to take from that is that just focus on being the best you can, and at the end of the day, the offers will come in. If what you've got is good, the offers will come in. You know, so that's. Or I shouldn't say is good. If what you got is what people want, then the offers will come in.
Right.
You know.
Speaking of success stories, could you tell us a little bit more about Jazz Festival experience and how did that go about?
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I find interesting about that is people are always asking me, "Hey man, do you have a connection at Jazz Fest? Can you get my demo in and all this kind of thing?" And I'm like, man, I wish I had a connection at Jazz Fest or any of these places, you know? So again, this comes back to just make the best product you can, you know? So basically with you know, we've been performing at Jazz Fest every year since Cypher has existed, Cypher has performed at Jazz Fest. The brass band has performed since I think 2018 or 17, like the year after we were invented or founded or whatever you want to call it. But in neither of those cases did we submit an application to the Jazz Fest. So we never, there's on the website, there's
grassroots,
like, artist, it wasn't even. Like I with Cypher, so I was always surprised with Cypher because we started it in 2014 at the Belmont. We did 2 months at the Belmont, and then February 2015 was when we switched to Blurry. And I guess March or April 2015 was when Jazz Fest sent us an email saying, hey, do you want to play at Jazz Fest this year? And I was like, we haven't even been around for a year, and somehow they want to book us. And I was really surprised by that. And I think when I spoke with Laurent Saunier, who's the VP of programming, oh no, this was years later, but it still applies. It still applies. At some point, I went up to him and I thanked him, like, man, you've booked us like the last 3 years in a row, whatever it has been, and I really, really appreciate that. And he turned to me and said, you understand, I'm not trying to do you any favors. I'm like, it's like, we don't have a choice but to book you. I'm like, and then I understood what he meant in the sense that people are talking about you.
That's it.
Yeah, people are talking about you. People want to see this band at the Jazz Fest. So if we didn't book, you'd be like, why did you not book these guys?
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So it was revealing, and it was also kind of like, this comes back to like, hey, do you have any contacts? Like, no, I don't. The guy just found out about it on his own, word of mouth, because we had a good event that was drawing people, and they booked us. So at the end of the day, focus on that. And more or less the same thing with the brass band. Like we started just like too late to get booked for that year's Jazz Fest, but then the next year we started getting booked, and we've been booked ever since. But again, it was a thing, like actually so the year before we played a Jazz Fest with the brass band, the way we got the brass band off the ground is, so the brass band is like a New Orleans style brass band, but plays hip hop instead of jazz. I think I explained that. But we really wanted to focus on sort of flash mobby type of experiences. So we would go random places around Montreal and just start playing. And people are like, what's going on here? And play a little bit, like 15 minutes, and then hit another spot. You know what I mean? And some places worked really well. Other places, people were just like,
what's going on here?
So you kind of learned about like different communities and how people react to stuff and whatever, where is appropriate, where is not appropriate. And then that year at Jazz Fest, we played like right outside on St. Catherine Street, like right outside the barrier. And like the security came over, like, you can't do this. Like we're gonna you can't do this right here, But it was kind of like, hey, book us, Jazz Fest, book us, And sure enough, next year we got booked. But I don't know if it was because of that or whatever. But it's just like we're trying to get out there and trying to get known, and that was it. But yeah, the brass band is like a crazy. Well, I guess it's like well, maybe not proof, but it's evidence that you should work on the thing the thing you're going to do, the art, the whatever it is. That's the thing you got to work on, and of course you got to promote it. Of course you got to get on social media these days, and you got to push it. But the fact that we've gotten these gigs without an album
says a lot. That says a lot.
So yeah. I mean, okay, so last year.
Product speaks for itself.
Yeah, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but like I said, we did the Festival d'été de Québec, we did Star Academy, we did the Governor General's Awards in Ottawa. Like we've done all these kinds of things that like is kind of unheard of for a band that doesn't even have an album. Like what?
That's why I want to go back to the word visionary, man. I'm telling.
No. Lucky, and just working on the music, and everything else just kind of follows from that. So, yeah,
it's a great success story, man. For anybody who's watching this right now and wants to know, how could they perform at one of your events? Because I noticed that you have a great ear for music. You're able to pick and choose certain people to work with, based on experience, right? So
sure.
What would be the first thing you would tell that 14-year-old child?
Sure. Well, first I want to contest your great ear for music.
Go ahead.
Because often I may have used this language during this interview. I'll say like, the best performer or whatever.
Right.
What I'm talking about is the thing that works for me, and also the thing that works for my projects. You know, as an example, you know, we have MCs that perform with Cypher, perform with brass band. Not every MC that performs with Cypher is the perfect match for the brass band, and vice versa. You know, depending on the context. As a very simple one, you know, with the brass band, not 99, but a lot of the time, how we got started was performing outdoors and performing for all ages groups. Now, how many MCs do you know who do not, or who have material that is appropriate for all ages groups, right?
Very
so you
few.
can have some incredible MCs that do the Cypher performance where it's in a club, 18 plus, no problem, but then to go out and rap in front of you know, adults and their kids, you got to keep it clean. You know?
Absolutely.
So that's just one aspect of the thing, you know. And same thing is applicable for the horns and for this, and like there's certain horn players that, you know, like in Montreal, we're in this winter wonderland for 6 months of the year, whatever the heck it is, and when you perform outdoors with a horn, it's a totally different scenario, and just having the sound and projection to be heard is not the same as being inside where sound is reflecting off of you. So the reason why I mentioned that being in winter for 6 months is like there are other places around the world, such as New Orleans, where it's warm all year round, and you can play outdoors all year round, so you develop this massive sound. So even with the you know, some trumpet player that I might love, like that person sounds incredible, but they just don't have it factor, you know, it's not as big, you know, and it needs to be. So anyway, so that was just my little preamble, you know, before getting into the question. In terms of how to be involved, man, again, work on, it's two things. Work on being the best you can be at whatever it is you're doing, and then make sure people know about it. Now, I'm not saying, like, there's people who, you know, especially this day and age, there's people who are caring so much about being known, but not really working on being good at it, you know? And that's like the people who are always on social media, but not necessarily working on their craft, you know? They do 40 takes of their guitar lick or of their verse or whatever, and they post the good one on TikTok or whatever. And then there's the other side, the guys who are like these geniuses and killing it, they're not on anything. And you're just like, where, you know, where are you, you know? I should also say, in terms of getting known, not just about the internet. Like the internet is great, but like you got to go to real things. You got to, like, Grove right now, I would say, is the place to go, because it's a jam session, and there are many other jam sessions as well that you can go to meet people in the flesh. You know, when it's one thing to see you do a TikTok video, it's another thing to go see you in the flesh and be like, okay, this guy can sing, this guy can play, this guy can whatever, you know, you, or just vibing off of them. You like, the guy can sing, but then I talk to him and, oh my God, I cannot, you know what I mean? So you gotta connect. You know, connect. I don't like the term network, but you gotta just get out there, be seen, and be interacting with people, and you know, trying things and going for things. Yeah, I would say that young kid, those are the things to work on. Just be as good as you can, and then get out there. You know, that's it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So this episode is brought to you by Urban Eats Montreal. If you want to get some great food, make sure you contact Urban Eats Montreal. Shout outs to you guys, and thank you for the opportunity. Now, for the last question, I want to ask you, what is one thing you want people to remember Vincent for?
Shit. I don't even know I can swear on this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you go ahead, man. Be yourself.
My potty mouth. No. Actually, what is Urban Eats Montreal?
Urban Eats, it's actually a restaurant, and they do delivery as well.
What kind of food is it?
We'll talk about
that. No, I want to know, man. I love food. So, I mean, people will always remember me for my love of food. It's very evident. But what do I want people to remember me for?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
I guess I hope that people got joy by either seeing my groups perform or whatever creative output I'm putting out there. I hope people enjoyed it. And I also hope that the people that I worked with also enjoyed it. Because sometimes working, it can be there can be some sources of friction. There can be there's also a power dynamic where I'm the boss and I'm paying everybody, and so people are like, oh, thank you, and I'm like, I hope they actually enjoyed it. They're not just being like, thanks, I'll take the money and I'm out, you know. So I hope that I guess I hope that, you know, I hope that there is also, I mean, I was gonna say I hope there's some kind of lasting, like, I hope it goes on to the next generation, but I feel like that's already there with Grove, you know. So I'm seeing the impact that I've had. Actually, it's not even just Grove. I've already seen, you know, we were talking about people meeting at Cypher and meeting the next generation of people. I've seen that, and I've also seen like groups that came out of Cypher, you know, like people that met each other at Cypher and then started a group, or they met their beat maker or their whatever, you know.
Serenity is one of them, right?
Oh man, Serenity, man, Serenity is a great. I know this was supposed to be last question, but anyway, I just got to tell the story.
Go ahead.
So Serenity, I remember, you know, running Cypher. She came down, and I didn't know who she was or anything, and she came up on stage, and you know, we all have our preconceptions and our prejudices and whatever. You know, girl comes up on stage to perform. I assume she's going to sing.
Right.
That is my prejudice, right?
Same here.
Right? She comes up and she starts rapping, and I'm like, this is really good. This is really good. Wait a second. This is off the dome. This is a freestyle. This is not only really good.
Tempo just kept getting better.
Exactly. I'm like, what is happening here? So I'm like, okay, who is this? What, you know?
She's different.
So yeah, it's one of those moments where you immediately like, I gotta keep contact with this person for sure, you know? And she didn't come back for a while. Actually, no, that's not true. We kept in contact a little bit. And then she came and did an opening act with her own musical, like her own material, you know? And I'll be completely honest, and Serenity, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but that first performance as an opening act was not good. It was. I won't get into the details of why, although if you want to do a breakdown, I'll go personally with you. But I think she knew that too, because years later she came back and did another opening act with her project. It was a whole other level, whole other level, you know. And of course, we're always keeping tabs. And I was like, hey, you should come by, like just the jam and all this, and just kept on inviting her to come through. And eventually, I was like, okay, I think I want her to try the house band, see how she fits with everybody else. And then, you know, it's just like one step at a time, you know, with all that. And yeah, so that's somebody that I take obviously zero credit for her you know, skills and whatever, but it's somebody that we discovered through Cypher, and I'm really happy to see her success, not just as a part of the band and whatever, but her own projects. She's constantly doing stuff, you know, as herself, doing her material. So that's great, you know.
Amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, so your question, what should I be? I'm trying to avoid that. I guess I hope people have a, you know, I'm getting old, and I am old, and I just hope at the end of the day, people have a fond memory of me and the creative output that I have. You know, I don't even care whether people look back at it in the future. If it gets forgotten, that's fine. But I just hope that it had some impact on somebody else, and maybe now people are listening to this guy who goes back 3 generations to me or whatever it is. You know, if I had some little piece of that, awesome. You know, that's the most I hope for.
Amazing, man. Hey, Vince, it was a pleasure having you here.
Likewise.
And it's great to see you still flourishing at your craft, and you've been doing this for more than 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, professionally, 20 years, you know, I've always had music part of my life, so yeah, whatever that adds up to.
Hey, man, as long as there's a long-lasting impact, and that's something that's actually obvious for the people to see, and they know what you're about, and they know what you stand for, so keep on keeping on. That's all I got to say, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have a good one. It's a wrap. There